Donald Trump announces his picks for UN ambassador and border czar. Bitcoin hits a record high in response to the 2024 election. And Democrat-run states like Michigan spend more on illegal aliens than homeless veterans. We have those stories and so much more. Blaze News Tonight starts right now. Welcome to the chaos. I'm Jill Savage. Today is Monday, November 11th. So with the presidential election behind us, what's the mandate for Donald Trump? So here to break it all down with us is BlazeTV host Stu Burguiere, who's filling in for Matthew Peterson. So Stu, I want to put you on the hot seat since we have you here today and just talk about what has been happening over the weekend, right? We're still riding the high from the Trump victory. So what are the next steps here for Donald Trump?
I mean, it's been a great week. I think the first steps for us is just to kind of celebrate a little bit and have a few days. I kind of did that this weekend. Like, it was kind of nice to have good news for once after the election hell we went through for all that time, and finally came out on the other side with some good news. And now you kind of step back and you realize it's time to immediately go back to work, right? Like, there's no real wait. There's no real delay here. If you think about the way that a presidential term begins, and this is something we have to kind of think about this early. You have, your first 100 days where you have that sort of grace period, and people will kind of let you do stuff that they wouldn't normally do. You'll have one reconciliation bill because of the way the Senate is set up. Assuming the House comes through, which we do think it will, you'll have one Senate bill where you can get 50 votes, and that has to do something with the budget. Usually with Republicans, it's some sort of tax cut. Probably have some other stuff jammed in there as well. And then you get into year two. And year two is a situation where every smarmy Republican from a purple district is going to say they can't do anything. So really, you have that first 6 months to a year to get everything you want to get done. You have to move fast. Usually what happens in that first midterm election, bad things. This is usually this is just historically, it happens to almost everybody. You lose the House or the Senate. You usually lose some of your majority if you have one. It's not normally positive, just because people usually push back against whatever direction you're going in. So you got 2 years, you got to make it count. And you were looking at the way Donald Trump is coming out of the gate here. He knows that. Like, he went through this once. He's not going to let any of those problems happen again. He's going, he's putting the pedal to the metal here.
The man is churning out videos like no one's business right now. It's not just like, oh, I'm going to say I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. And one of his big things is promises made, promises kept, right? And that was one of the things that he was very good at back in his first administration, is doing what he said he was going to do. It was almost shocking to see a politician do that. But now, Stu, like every single day, we're getting new Donald Trump videos of where I'm going to make sure like that gender affirming care isn't happening in the United States. I'm going to make sure like the Department of Education is gone. Like, there are so many big things that he's already saying. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, I think this is a smart approach too from Trump, in that like he's realizing how we are as people, right? Like there was an artist I used to follow that used to release one song per month. And I remember thinking, like, that's the best approach. Like, instead of giving me a 3-year wait and then I get an album, one song per month. You're always kind of expecting, you're always kind of engaged with the artist. I always liked that approach. And what Trump is doing here is not giving you like the State of the Union. Here's 9,000 proposals that no one's going to remember. He's giving these things in sort of like little bite-sized chunk videos where he's hitting, a bunch of things that are related, things that he wants to do, and things that he's clearly been thinking about for a while. It's interesting. Normally, when you become president, you have an ongoing list of ideas you want to accomplish, and then you're hit in the face with life. You're hit in the face with the realities of being president. And a lot of times that's taking you off kilter. I mean, certainly Donald Trump did not get into office to deal with pandemic response, right? That was not why he did it. And, George W. Bush didn't get into office to try to deal with 9/11. Like, these things hit you, and all of a sudden your entire presidency changes into something else. he's coming in here realizing that could happen at any time. He's come in here with proposals. He's had an entire term off to think about them, to align the people he thought would be best in these roles. And now he can kind of come in here with his feet kind of moving, running, and getting started before one of these realities of a presidency gets in his way. And I like, this is what you'd hope he would do. And it seems like he's on target for this. He's got to get the right people in. He's got to make sure he gets the House. There's a lot there, but he's in the right direction, I think.
All the best people. He's going to get all the best people. Now, RFK Jr. and Elon Musk, Elon specifically, has basically just been hanging out at Mar-a-Lago since Election Day, according to my sources and CNN. So they're making sure that the transition team kind of goes the way that they wanted it to go. What have you been looking at with the transition team, and where do you want to see some of these next steps move?
Well, you brought up two interesting possibilities. I would say they diverge dramatically in my mind. So one is Elon Musk, and I would say of any of the things going on right now, my high-end excitement comes from Elon Musk the most. Musk is, and I read his autobiography when it came out. When was it, last year? And because I knew about him, you knew the things that he was doing, but I didn't know granular detail about his life. And he's an interesting guy in that I think working for him would be pretty stressful, especially if you were not his favorite person. There was a lot of incidents of him coming in and just blowing out entire departments and looking at the very technicality of the rule to get something done. One of my favorite stories was he was on the line to report some level of Tesla production. And I think it was Model 3. And he was way behind, and they were flying drones over his factories to see how many he could pump out in a day, and they were shorting his stock, and he was getting pissed about this. So he went and he found a loophole in the law that allowed places that deal with auto and manufacturing and even repair to open up temporary tents outside to do specials. We're going to do a special $29 oil change. We could put a tent out. So he built the world's largest tent and put an entire factory outside under the tent so he could hit those production goals and burn all the people shorting the company. He's that kind of thinker. And that approach as applied to the U.S. government is thrilling to me. The fact that he might come in and do that and say, you know what, sometimes you need to fire entire departments. He's the type of person who really does that. On the other side, RFK Jr., I'm not as excited about. I don't necessarily need...
You don't want to be healthy?
You know what? From the federal government, no. I really, I think you can agree with everything RFK Jr. says about food. Yeah. I don't want a centralized government trying to, quote unquote, make me healthy. Let me choose what I want to eat. That being said, if he stays away from the environment and he makes recommendations and says, hey, here's the new food pyramid, whatever, I don't care. I think it's important for Trump to make sure his fingerprints are all over what someone like RFK Jr. is doing, because it's a lifelong Democrat. I mean, I'd say apply the same thing to Tulsi Gabbard. Gabbard is someone who I like a lot more than RFK Jr., but also she ran Bernie Sanders' campaign in Hawaii. We have to make sure that we're watching all these things going on. I think Trump is all over that, though.
Well, Trump has named his border czar. It's Tom Homan, and here he is on 60 Minutes. Take a look.
We have seen one estimate that says it would cost $88 billion to deport 1 million people a year.
I don't know if that's accurate or not.
Is that what American taxpayers should expect?
What price do you put on national security? Is that worth it?
Is there a way to carry out mass deportation without separating families?
Of course there is. Families can be deported together.
Well, that's one way of doing it.
I freaking love that clip.
Right.
I love it.
But that, Stu, to set the tone, right? Oh, this is the guy that I'm going to make sure is in charge of the border czar position, speaks volumes.
It really does. And, you can do a lot with tone, actually. I mean, it's funny. If you go back to 2017, Donald Trump comes in and his tone is different than everybody else, right? His tone is, we're going to stop the, illegal immigrants from coming across the border. We're going to deport those that are here. You're not wanted here, essentially. We love you. If you are illegal immigrants, please come, make our country better. We love that. But if you're an illegal immigrant, you're not wanted here. That was his tone. And tone works for a while, right? It doesn't solve the problem long term, but it does send a message, hey, like, this is not what you wanted. You notice in the Trump administration, he wasn't able to get all of his border stuff done. And of course, he'll never be able to get all of it done. But if he can get a good chunk of it done and lock that in for a time period that will hopefully last between not only his administration or maybe a Vance or a DeSantis administration after it, you can make a massive difference in this problem. What we saw with Biden was the opposite, right? We saw a tonal change, even though some of the rules didn't even change. Many of them did. But the tone change was, you're welcome here. We want you here. And of course, people are smart enough to get that sense. And they come and they say, they get that message. They come across the border. They change our entire society. They create a lot of economic harm, among other things. So I think Trump can start this right off the bat. This problem will get a lot better just by him being in office and talking. And then, when people like this are in charge of implementing the policy, these aren't, the typical Republicans who are like, oh, what we really want is a comprehensive border reform where everyone gets to come across and do whatever they want. This is somebody who actually cares about the border and wants to lock it down from illegal immigrants. And if we can do that, you're going to have, I think, a really positive change, not only with the problem with crime, but also economically.
I love that you're talking about the tone and you're just throwing out there. You can tell we're still riding the high of the Trump victory because you're like, you know what? When we get to the JD Vance or Ron DeSantis administration, we haven't even gotten to the Donald Trump one. It's not even January of 2025 yet, but we're going to be riding that high as long as we can, because we don't get to do that very often. When we come back, though, Jim Rickards will join us to explain Bitcoin's meteoric rise. Coming up. Well, I'll tell you what, we are in such a good mood. And what goes better with a good mood than your favorite glass of whiskey? And if it turns out that with every glass, you're helping to support a great American cause, doesn't it make it that much better? Well, it's time to chart your own course with Flying Ace whiskeys from Craftco. They're inspired by generations of American aviators and proudly made right here in the United States. And they not only make amazing whiskeys, they're committed to supporting our brave troops and their families through their partnerships with Folds of Honor. And they're providing scholarships to the families of America's fallen or disabled. And these scholarships allow families to begin to chart their own new course after experiencing great sacrifice. And Flying Ace whiskeys, they're American proud because they're American made, and they're American proud because they're helping to support our heroes and their families. So don't wait around. Today is the day to see what all the hype is about. Go to flyingacespirits.com. Use code America to get free shipping. It's flyingacespirits.com. Code America for free shipping. Donald Trump won the presidential election and the markets have spoken. Stocks, gold, Bitcoin, what's the outlook and how should you prepare? We're joined by financial expert Jim Rickards to dive into what's next under a Trump administration and help us make sense of the financial landscape ahead. And his new book, Money GPT, comes out tomorrow. So Jim, thanks again for joining us. Let's go rapid fire through some of these. What's your outlook now for stocks?
Well, it depends on the time horizon. So the immediate reaction to the Trump election was stocks took off, and with good reason. His economic policies, less regulation, drill baby drill, basically getting rid of wasteful investment in what I call the Green New Scam, which Donald Trump picked up on. We're very happy about that. But yeah, so he has a lot of things that are going to be very good for stocks. However, there's something bigger than Trump. There's something bigger than the electoral process, which is the economy itself. Economy kind of goes its own way. I mean, one analogy is, you're turning an aircraft carrier. I've been a pilot of a lot of boats, not an aircraft carrier, but you turn the wheel, nothing happens. It takes a while, and then eventually the boat turns around. So if you said a year to 3 years from now, would the economy be a lot stronger, a lot better, and will stocks be higher under Trump? The answer is yes. But for the next 6 to 9 months, we may have to get through a recession. The business cycle has, goes its own way, and there are a lot of signs of recession out there. So we may get off to a rough start, but same thing happened to Ronald Reagan in 1982. He had one of the worst recessions in U.S. history, but finished with very strong growth toward the end of his first term and into his second term.
Jim, it's been interesting that, Bitcoin has gone up today, it's at its all-time highs. Obviously, part of this is just a friendliness from the incoming administration toward Bitcoin, but it also, theoretically at least, addresses a lot of our money printing concerns over the long term. What is the future of Bitcoin? Is this something that we should be looking into as we go into the Trump administration?
Well, it's funny. I've studied Bitcoin for a long time. I was in Bitcoin versus gold debates. Leave aside whether that's a sensible comparison, but I've been doing those since 2010. I read Nakamoto's paper in 2009. I understand the math. I understand everything about it. I make the point that the designers of it, Satoshi Nakamoto, whoever, were very good at applied mathematics and engineering. Didn't seem to know very much about money. So here's the thing with Bitcoin. It took me a long time to figure this out. It's like a casino chip. So you go into the casino, put your money on the roulette table. Croupier gives you chips. You bet them. You can win or lose. But whatever you have left at the end of the evening, you take them over to the cashier and you get cash and you leave. The problem is if you walked out of the casino with your chips, they wouldn't be worth anything. You couldn't buy a cup of coffee with them, and it's not really a form of money. So in the Bitcoin world, the price is at an all-time high. It's been up. It's crashed 80%. It's rallied multiples, several 100%. So that's all good. But it's really just a form of gambling. I don't really think of it as an investment. There's no use case for Bitcoin. Now, can you make money? Absolutely, and a lot of people have. So my attitude is I'm not a Bitcoin basher. I just say, hey, yeah, it's an old rock and roll song from the 50s, shout, shout, knock yourself out. I mean, if you want to buy Bitcoin, knock yourself out, do it. But I don't really think of it as a form of money. There are a lot of technical reasons for that. There's no debt. Most money is debt. If you take a $20 bill out of your wallet and look at it, read the contract, it says Federal Reserve note. A note is a form of debt. It's a liability on the balance sheet of the Federal Reserve Bank. That's true of almost every form of money. It's usually somebody basically taking government debt and giving them something that they can spend. Bitcoin, there's no debt. There's no debt market. It won't serve as a reserve currency. So it's there. It's interesting. People like it, and people can make money at it. Could go higher, could crash, but I don't really think of it as a viable form of money.
All right, so you've been in the Bitcoin versus the gold debates. So let's go there. You also had a book, The New Case for Gold, a few years ago. So gold, it's still around its all-time highs. It's backed off a little bit since then. But what's your case for gold right now?
Gold is going to go much higher, and here's the reason. First of all, when people say gold goes higher, what they literally mean is the dollar price of gold is higher. So 2000, now it's around 2,700. Give or take. It'll make its way to 3,000, eventually 4,000, and eventually much higher than that. But what's really going on? It's not that gold's getting higher, it's that the dollar is collapsing in front of your eyes. Now, if you compare the dollar to other currencies, right now it's very strong. There's something called the dollar index, DXY. It's going up a lot. Dollar is stronger against the euro, Japanese yen, Chinese yuan. So currency to currency, the dollar is getting a lot stronger. But that's kind of irrelevant because they're all currencies. They're all central bank notes, as I just described. If you really want to understand what's going on with the dollar, look at the dollar price of gold. And when the dollar price of gold goes 2,000, 2,500, 3,000 and higher, which it is, what's really happening is you're watching your dollar evaporate. You're watching the dollar crash relative to a hard asset. So what's the case for gold going higher, even though I just described it as the dollar collapse? Central banks are net buyers. That had not been true for decades. Beginning in 2010, that term, but that's accelerating. Russia's buying. By the way, Russia has a particular reason for buying, which is the U.S. froze $300 billion worth of lawfully purchased treasury notes that Russia owned in their reserve positions after the special military operation in Ukraine. We're now in the process, the Biden administration is in the process of stealing $50 billion of those assets to make another loan to Ukraine. So watching the U.S. freeze treasury securities and then steal them, does it make you want to buy treasury securities? No, it makes you want to buy gold. So Russia has quadrupled their reserves in the last 14 years. China, same thing, quadrupled their reserves. Japan, Kazakhstan, Vietnam, Mexico, Philippines, Turkey, Iran, even though Iran's not transparent, they're all buying gold. And part of it has to do with the BRICS. They don't have a new currency yet, but they're working on a new payment system. So gold is a way to settle up trade balances. But the main reason is people are looking for alternatives to the dollar. I'm not saying the dollar is going away. You can't get totally out of the dollar. It's too big for that. But at the margin, you can buy gold. So what that means for a retail investor or anybody else, you've got kind of a floor under it. You've got the central banks buying a quarter of annual output. So that's going to put a floor under it, and then you can kind of just go up from there. So those are my favorite kind of trades where they your downside's limited, but your upside's practically unlimited.
Well, Jim, I want to look at Donald Trump right now and his administration, because you said the final number for him in the Electoral College would be 312. And that is exactly what it turned out to be. So what have you seen now already as the Trump administration moves with its transition team? And what do you want to see moving forward?
Well, looking at the transition team, I think is doing a great job. I mean, we've got some big, Susie Wallace as chief of staff, Elise Stefanik as ambassador to the United Nations. By the way, I haven't heard any apologies from Mark Cuban. He says that Trump can't deal with strong, independent women. Well, his first two choices were strong, independent women. So
and he deleted all of his posts on X about Kamala Harris today, too.
Yeah, well, it's too bad. You can't delete the internet. We all know what he said. But Lee Zeldin for EPA, Steve Miller for, I think, maybe deputy chief of staff, but he's going to have a very broad portfolio. Tom Homan for, they haven't specifically said Customs and Border Patrol, but he'll be a czar. Very strong on deportation. And, you'll never, just as a practical matter, you'll never be able to deport 12 million people, but if you could deport the 2 million worst, the criminals in their home country, the criminals in the U.S., terrorist watch lists and others, that would be a great start, and they're very determined to do that. So I think they're off to a good start. Having said that, what I'm watching is the resistance. I remember in 2016, right after the election, people were shocked. By the way, I predicted that Trump would win in 2016. I think there were 5 people who did that, but I was one of them. But they announced immediately we're the resistance, as if they were the French resistance risking their lives. They're basically just a bunch of paper pushers with social media accounts, but they're very powerful because they're entrenched in the bureaucracy. So we've seen 4 states already announced they're going to have special state laws. We've seen people basically forming informal groups to push back on Trump. So here's the question. The resistance is there. The transition team is off to a good start, but are they going to really clean the house? In 2017, Trump did not drain the swamp because he couldn't find the swamp. Now he knows where it is. It's in the Plum Book. That's the government printing office book that lists 8,000 jobs where the president can pick anyone he wants, kind of not affected by civil service. Some require Senate confirmation, but they're the president's picks. I know I've been in touch with some transition people. They've done a much better job of identifying those. And at least so far, they're off to a great start. So I think Trump's going to prevail, but it's a very tough fight and the resistance is real.
Well, as I mentioned off the top of this segment, you have a new book, Money GPT, coming out tomorrow. It's AI and the threat to the global economy. So what can people expect from the book?
Well, thank you. It's order on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and it'll be in the bookstores tomorrow morning. It doesn't bash AI. AI is very powerful. And by the way, it's here now. It's not like, it's coming in 5 years. It's here now. It's on your car dashboard. It's in your refrigerator. It's in Alexa, Siri. It's everywhere you look. So it's here. And it'll do a lot of good, and it's very powerful, but there are some dangers. And what I really do in the book is I warn about what those dangers are, particularly with regard to the stock market. Because one thing about artificial intelligence, it's not intelligent. It's all math. It's not your friends. We have a tendency to anthropomorphize. We give it human characteristics. It's just math. It's just a bunch of nodes and layers, and outputs become inputs of different layers. I mean, I've designed AI systems. I know how it works. So it can do a lot of good. But in the stock market in particular, there's something, it's called the fallacy of composition. It sounds complicated, but, you're at a baseball game, for example, and you don't have a good view because the person in front of you is wearing a big hat or whatever. So you stand up and you get a better view. But what happens next? Well, the person behind you stands up and the person behind her stands up and so forth. The next thing you know, the whole stadium's on their feet and nobody's better off and everyone's worse off because everyone's standing up. So that's an example of how a strategy that does work for an individual fails catastrophically at scale when everybody does it. Same thing in the stock market. If you have a stock market crash, and in March 2020, the stock market fell 30% in 1 month, the fastest crash of that magnitude in history, people have a tendency to sell everything, go to cash, go to the sidelines, wait it out, and then tiptoe back in. That can be a very good individual strategy. But if everybody does it, you have all sellers, no buyers, stock market blows through the circuit breakers, goes through the floor, and you actually have to close the markets. So I describe how that happens. You don't need a mastermind or an evil genius or anything. It's built into all the systems. So I'm warning people about that. Look out for it. I have some recommendations for regulators and others as to how they can mitigate that using cybernetics. But, instead of slamming the brakes on an icy road, why don't you just tap the brakes? There's a way to do that. But I also recommend having some non-digital assets, so gold, silver, fine art, land, natural resources, alternative investments, things that will not be affected by the kind of market crash that I'm warning about.
Absolutely. And thanks so much for joining us, Jim. Always appreciate your time.
Thanks.
When we come back, we'll break down the battle for Senate Majority Leader just ahead. Oh, it's a long debate at Thanksgiving. What's better? Is it the turkey or the ham? Well, if you picked either one, it's wrong, because there's free ham now from Good Ranchers worth $110. It's their Thanksgiving special. You get 100% American meat plus a free 10-pound spiral cut ham just for free. By shopping at Good Ranchers, you're directly supporting local farms and ranches in the United States, and you get to skip the chaos of the grocery store and celebrate what matters the most to you this Thanksgiving, which is time with the people that you love. So to claim your free Thanksgiving ham before they're gone, go to goodranchers.com and subscribe to any of their boxes, which are 100% American meat and wild-caught seafood, and use my code Jill at checkout. Be sure to order, though, by November 19th for guaranteed delivery by Thanksgiving, and enjoy that free 10-pound ham and get connected to American farms and ranches this November at goodranchers.com. Use my code Jill to claim your free Thanksgiving ham before they run out. So if you're thankful for farmers and ranchers of this country, go to goodranchers.com and support them with every order. Goodranchers.com, American meat delivered. Last week, we told you we may be seeing a little less of Chris Bedford, depending on when his newest addition to his family, Josephine, decided to make her big entrance into the world. Well, she was born on Sunday, so while Bedford's out on paternity leave, we have Rebeka Zeljko. She's a political reporter for Blaze Media. So, Rebeka, thanks so much for joining us. But before we jump into the headlines, can you give us a little bit about your background?
Sure. Thanks for having me, guys. First of all, my name is Rebeka. I am a lifelong California native. I actually just moved to DC earlier this year after graduating college earlier in the winter time. Graduated a little bit early, gave myself a bit of a head start and saved a bit of money. I knew I wanted to work in media. I knew I wanted to work in politics. And so DC was the natural choice. And so I made the big cross-country move earlier this spring, and I've hit the ground running, and I'm loving it.
That's great. Now, in his latest Beltway brief, Chris still put one out, even though he's out there on paternity leave. He was writing about the importance of the Senate Majority Leader race in determining who controls D.C. Now, the race is between Senators John Cornyn, John Thune, and Rick Scott. So how do you see this battle shaking out?
Honestly, the toughest thing to say is the fact that it's all secret. All of the discussions have been happening behind closed doors. The vote itself is going to be a secret ballot, and I think that's actually, if I was a senator, I would be very happy about that fact, because it sort of alleviates any issue of potentially going to work the next day knowing that you endorsed the guy that lost, or you endorsed the guy that he doesn't like you because of it. And so I think that it might actually work in their favor. But of course, for us, it's difficult. We can't actually hold any senators accountable. And that's why we haven't seen many of the public endorsements come to the surface, is because they don't necessarily have to. It's all happening behind closed doors.
Do we think, I guess, Rick Scott is the one that has been promoted most by, I guess, conservatives on the more conservative side, the other two sort of maybe more the establishment flavor. Do we think Scott has a chance here? There was a sort of leaked whip count that had Scott pretty far behind everybody else. Does Scott have a chance, or is it just a pipe dream?
I think there are arguments to be made either way. I think earlier on in the race, especially, a lot of people kind of considered Scott as sort of like the protest candidate. And I think that there's definitely some weight behind that argument. That being said, a lot of the recent the pressure campaigns you've been seeing, especially on Twitter over the weekend, I think is a testament to the fact that, you might not be accountable to us on paper. We might not be able to see how you vote, but at the end of the day, um, somebody is going to put a leader in office. And so I think it is important that uh, a lot of voices like Elon Musk or Glenn Beck even have come out and endorsed Rick Scott. And I would have to say that that would probably influence at least some of the senators to vote maybe differently than they originally would have.
Well, Rebecca, we're 6 days away from the election, and we still don't know all of the House seats they still haven't been decided. But you wrote a piece for Blaze News highlighting some of the key House races to watch for the GOP conservatives. So can you break some of that down for us?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you said, we'd seen a lot of success. The Republican Party did very well last week. We took back the presidency, we took back the Senate, and we are projected to hold on to the House, which is good news. Right now, we sit at 214 seats, and Democrats currently have 204 seats. The magic number is 218 of the 435 House seats. It's a lot of math, but the bottom line is that we're only 4 seats away, and of the 18 seats that are currently have been uncalled, we are ahead in 8 of them. And so, I mean, there's 4 pickup opportunities in California alone, which would be enough to set us back into the majority. There's also a pickup opportunity for us in Iowa, in Alaska, and in Washington State.
And they need 218 here. I mean, looking at what, maybe 220, 221 probably is the highest end of what we're looking at, it seems, when this is all said and done. So what impact is there of taking someone like Elise Stefanik out of that group, right? Like, this is such a close majority that Republicans will likely have. And in addition to that, those first 100 days are crucial. Like, what happens with Stefanik if she does go, which it looks like she is, and how do they replace her? What happens?
Yeah, absolutely. And with a congresswoman like Stefanik, I mean, she's a total powerhouse in the Republican conference, and so that vacancy will definitely be felt. I imagine that even though we'll have a slim majority, it'll be enough to hopefully keep us through those first 100 days. And I imagine that they'll replace her hopefully with a Republican candidate who's just as strong. Although again, these are big shoes to fill, and so even though it is a slim majority, it's a victory nonetheless if we're able to reach 218 or even higher.
Well, Chris Bedford leaves big shoes to fill, and you have done so, Rebecca. Thanks so much for joining
Doing
us
my
today.
best.
The first of many appearances, Rebecca. Thanks so much.
Hopefully.
All
Thank
right,
you guys.
We'll see you later. When we come back, we'll examine how Michigan is housing illegals while some veterans remain homeless. Next. Today is Veterans Day, and in January, JD Vance will officially become the first Marine to serve as vice president. So here to break it all down for us is Kate Monroe, and she's a Marine Corps veteran and VetCom CEO. So Kate, I mean, as a Marine yourself, how do you feel about JD Vance representing you guys as the vice president?
Well, I feel pumped about it. I mean, he's the first ever Marine Corps vet to serve as vice president. I would love to have had that title, but kudos to him. I think that he's going to be great for veterans, great for active duty. I think that he can advise Trump and his administration on exactly what do veterans need. What can we help them with? That's kind of our motto at VetCom. It's like, how can I help you? And I think that we're going to see a lot more help for veterans, active duty military personnel, and their families.
It seems like one of these things that we should just get right. Like, I know there's a lot of difficult things that we have to do with our country and the economy to manage. Global situations are always on fire, but like, keeping our promise to our veterans should be something. It should be easy. It should be bipartisan. Do you see any future, not only of improving it during the Trump administration, but going forward? Is this something that we can actually finally nail as a country?
I do think that we can. And I think if there was an administration that could get it done, I think it's this current administration. When Trump was in the first time, we had continuity of care for their mental health. We had community care. I think it was going the right direction. And I think it was a big win. On Tuesday, it was a really big deal that Trump became president again with JD Vance. I definitely think that a lot of seated lawmakers that I have talked to about Veterans Affairs definitely see it as a bipartisan issue. I'd like to see more actually done. They just kind of use it as a chip sometimes, like they're playing poker with veterans' lives. But I think this go around may be the turning of the tide that we need to see for veterans to stop the homelessness, stop the sexual assaults, stop all of the really just the theft that's been going on in the veteran community. We've been taking their money and reallocating it.
Well, you mentioned homelessness, and there was a piece on the Blaze.com, and it was talking specifically about the state of Michigan. And they have a policy that offers $500 a month to immigrants, and that includes those that came into the country illegally. And it's highlighting a problem it's not available to homeless residents and veterans, and 500 of those are veterans. So why is a state out there like Michigan prioritizing illegals over our nation's veterans?
Well, I think any of the states that you see where they're prioritizing anyone over a veteran is because they're looking for votes. I think our border was left open with intention so that we could redistrict and help the blue side win. And I think you saw the VA HUD-VASH program get reallocated to migrants. You saw a 19% uptick in veteran homelessness. So it's a concerted effort you have to make to set veterans aside. At vetcom.us, we put $1 billion in lifetime income into veterans' pockets. There needs to be more organizations like us standing up and saying, hey, enough is enough. We got to do right by our nation's veterans, prioritize them first so we can get to everyone else second, third, fourth, fifth in line.
So what would you like to see now with the Trump administration as they are going to be taking office in January? What would you like to see them prioritize?
Well, the number one thing that you can do for veterans is actually help them transition out of active duty. Their transition from active duty to becoming a veteran is the number one issue we face as a country. We are a skill bridge provider, meaning that we hire people who are active duty service members into our company. We have 6 people now. Companies could make multiple millions of dollars in savings if they were worried more about hiring active duty service members, because then they would have a longer runway to take off. They would have a known quantifiable job when they get out. They would likely be working for a company that has healthcare provision in their plan. That's the number one thing that we could do. And I have set President Trump up for success by giving him an exact plan how to help these young men and women get transferred from active duty service. But the second thing is we need to build a massive base camp in our country, scoop up all the 33,000 homeless veterans, and we can use them as a roadmap to completely transform and rehabilitate all the lives of all of our homeless in our country.
Well, we hear the term peace through strength, right? And since we've seen Donald Trump elected, there's been so many changes that have happened around the world. So what gives you the most hope on that front?
Well, active duty service members are most safe during times of peace. And you've already seen a lot of these other countries who were sort of waiting to see if dad got home. And now they're like, oh, dad's home. Time to get our crap together, if you will. And these other countries go, okay, fine. Let's go ahead and wrap up these what would be forever wars, in the wake of a Trump legacy. And that's the thing I'm most excited about. When we stop being at war, active duty service members are safer. Their mental health may stay intact. And then we can focus on all the veterans that we have in our country. I think that Trump's very strong on veterans and active duty service personnel. And quite frankly, he's really the only one that can keep the entire globe at peace, because if you're willing to speak boldly and carry a big stick, a lot can get done.
Well, today is Veterans Day, but if people are out there and they want to help our veterans any time of the year, what's the best way that you would say we should be doing things?
Well, there's 2 things. We want to say thank you for your service, and that's nice. People like me, I hear it all the time, so I think happy to have served. But most veterans are like, I don't even know what to say back to. Thank you for your service. You're better off saying, how can I help? Because veterans need help. And the number 2 thing is the thing they need help with is battling the VA. The VA is basically a big insurance company that flat doesn't want to pay like every other insurance company. So if you want to help a veteran and they're not collecting up to $3,600 a month tax-free, send them over to VetCom, because in less than 120 days, they could be almost $4,000 a month richer. So those are the 2 things you could do. How can I help? Send them over to VetCom and let's get them whole. Let's get them prosperous. Let's get them back on their journey through life.
Well, Kate Monroe, thanks so much for your service and for being on the show today. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you guys so much. Have a blessed day.
When we come back, we'll wrap up the show. We'll have some final thoughts. Stay tuned. Well, it's Monday after the election, and sometimes I still can't believe that this is our reality, that Donald Trump won. And Stu, there is almost a big sense of relief, obviously, but then just, I don't think that reality has sunk in, right? And we see, like we said, like the Trump videos that are coming out and all that, but it hasn't actually hit me yet that this is going to be how our country is going to be moving forward.
It feels like it's been a long time since we've had any good run of good news, right? I mean, if you think about, 2016 happens and like people are shocked by it. But like, Trump's first term was hit with a lot of like craziness. It felt wild at the time, right? He was this new thing coming in. There was this sort of like always something going on. Like it was one of those things that every day you'd wake up, there'd be a new tweet or a new accusation against Donald Trump. And it was just nonstop. It felt like maintenance, right? Like it was like pushing back against the media coming after him all the time. And then, 2020 happens and Joe Biden comes into office and immediately we're into the tragedy of Afghanistan, which, I maintain was enough, right? Even if it was just Afghanistan, even if there was no inflation, if there was no border problem, there's no economic trouble, just Afghanistan and the way they handled that was enough for him to never be back in the White House or Kamala Harris back in the White House again. And now we're kind of coming out of this and saying, well, wait a minute. Now we went through that whole era. The pandemic was part of that as well. Trump's had 4 years to kind of sit back and get ready for this. And there's a real sense of optimism. I do worry that we're going to get smacked in the face.
I
Like
know.
it just feels like that. It's going to happen because it never seems like we have too long of good news before bad news pops around the corner. But like, there's reasons to be optimistic here. Trump was president for 4 years. They called him Hitler. They tried to kill him on stage. He was able to come through all of that and come out on the other side with what seems like a much better organized approach here as we go into 2025. And I think the economy is set up for good things. There's a lot to be optimistic about, and we need to be able to handle that too.
Yeah, I was going to say, with maybe the multiple assassination attempts, maybe that's why we're waiting for the other shoe to drop. But we have to keep pushing forward and just, let's stay on cloud nine as long as we can, Stu, because reality will smack us in the face sooner rather than later.
Yeah, one of the ways I've been kind of trying to enjoy myself is just sit back and just watch everybody on the left wallow in their pain. We did a show on that on Stu Does America today, just pointing out all the crazy things that they're doing. And it's kind of fun to watch, honestly. I know that shouldn't be the way you feel, but every once in a while you need to just sit back and you realize that, like, for all the criticisms, like they've been criticizing the right for their election stolen theories, the stolen election theories for all these years. And you see, as soon as they lose, all those people are online with the same. I mean, Rachel Maddow's right in the middle of it, already basically saying that these elections have been stolen, or at least something similar to that. You see it all over online. They're talking about how Elon Musk used Starlink to hack into the voting machines. Like, it's just awesome. It's just fun to watch. It's so completely ridiculous. They're going to do it anyway. We might as well enjoy ourselves.
All right. So when it comes to the administration itself, we've already talked about Elise Stefanik joining. And it's going to be filled with other House members as well, most likely. We know the unfortunate thing, Stu, is when you're a Republican, there's a lot of rhinos and very few conservatives. So the ones that are conservative might be pulled up into the administration as well. So what are we looking at in the House?
The House is really, I mean, I wouldn't go too crazy pulling people out of the House.
I hope not. But
I mean, Stefanik is
just
one.
Look at what we have.
Right. I mean, you're talking about
Not a deep bench on the conservative side.
No, and just the raw numbers, right? Like you if you come out with 220 seats or 221 seats, you've got a very small window of error, right? The margin of error there is really tiny. And then you start getting into these like pragmatic life events, like daughters are graduating and House members aren't there for votes, right? People get sick and they don't show up. You got to, their grandmother died and the funeral is that Tuesday, they're not there. Things like that will affect the path of the country. It gets impossible. Of course, the other part of this is you also just have kind of like rhino type members that don't really want to go along with anything, especially when we get into 2026, when they get closer to the election. If they're in a district that maybe leans a little bit blue, that they were able to win, they're going to want to show their opposition to a Donald Trump. The Senate is not quite as dire. But I mean, if you think about it, they have 53 senators. That's probably where this thing lands. McCormick will get Pennsylvania, probably Gallego in Arizona, Rosen in Nevada. So these things all land that way. Well, you've got Murkowski in that 53. You've got Collins in that 53. You've got a lot of like old school sort of, establishment style Republicans that will vote for certain things. They can be dependable on certain things, but they will weaken any bill that Donald Trump wants to push through. Many of them are not, they'll go along with Donald Trump at this point. There's not the opposition that he had in 2016, 2017, 2018, the straight out opposition, but there still are going to be people who are working behind the scenes for their own sort of special gifts and handouts to all this stuff. And so you look at whatever that bill is, whatever that reconciliation bill is they can get in 2025 is a little bit weaker. And if you start, we're talking about 53 senators. That's if he doesn't pluck one or two senators out for the cabinet. So he's got to be really careful here. Governors are interesting. Ex-military people are interesting. You saw that he's talking about some of these Senate candidates that lost in close races are kind of interesting for some of these roles. There are places to pluck, but the more that you go after those numbers, just raw numbers, the more danger you put yourself in.
All right, so we're talking about the Senate. Let's stay there because this Senate Majority Leader fight, I don't know if we're being built up to be let down, Stu, because over the weekend, Rick Scott has been gaining momentum. Now, Thune and Cornyn, please, I want nothing to do with them. So Rick Scott is the best of the three, clearly, if you come from a conservative space, which we do. Are we being, though, built up just to be let down?
Probably, but frankly, yeah, I think probably. Here's what I say. I think the worst of all three is Cornyn. I think he's absolutely terrible and should not even be a senator from the state of Texas, let alone a Senate Majority Leader.
I call him Second Amendment Judas. Like, how is he in the state of Texas?
John Thune is next. He's not good either. I think he's slightly better than Cornyn. Even Rick Scott has his problems on the Second Amendment, for example. Yeah. He's not perfect there. I do think he's the most desirable of the three. Part of me thinks, we don't, I wish someone else would put their hat into the running, but I don't think it's going to happen. I think it's going to be one of those three. I do think the only way that Rick Scott wins is if Donald Trump comes out and explicitly says he wants him to win. And right now, Donald Trump is more like playing in the background. He's like, I'm not going to influence this process. He's had other people out there, like supposedly in the leaked list, JD Vance is going to vote for Rick Scott. That's kind of a telling signal. Yeah. But he really needs to advocate. He needs to call out these senators and say, look, I want this guy. This guy's the best guy for me. Because if he doesn't do that, there's too many friendships in that Senate. Trump has a lot of power right now. If he believes this is the most important thing for his agenda, he needs to explicitly say it. If not, I think what he will do is he'll get things like these appointments in recess. He will get gifts and concessions from a Cornyn or a Thune that will make them a little bit more palatable. But if he really wants Rick Scott, he's got to be explicit about it.
All right, in 20 seconds, something that really doesn't matter on the grand scheme of things as much as like a Senate Majority Leader, but press secretary is out there. And I've seen the name Alex Jones floated out there, and I could not imagine what this would be.
No, not Alex Jones. No.
It's hilarious to think about, though. Could you imagine that voice?
Yes, even he would think. Gotta believe
coming at you every day, going from Karine Jean-Pierre to somebody like the exact opposite.
I will say it would give us material every single day. I've heard Carrie Lake floated for that one.
She might actually be a real one that they put out there.
Right. I don't think they're going to go with Alex.
They're not.
It would be fun, I'm sure.
Listen, I just wanted to get a laugh out of you. Thanks so much, though, for filling in.
Thanks for having me.
Joining me today. It's been great to get your take on all of it. And if you want to get our take here every night on Blaze News Tonight, be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. And we'll be back to break it all down tomorrow night.